A single dad struggles to afford his daughter's dream toy until a stranger behind him pays and quietly follows them out of the store, setting off a chain of events neither of them saw coming. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The toy aisle was brighter than the rest of the stores of color, blinking lights, and shiny boxes stacked higher than Sophie could reach. Jack Carter walked behind her, hands buried in his coat pockets, pretending not to notice how her eyes lit up at every new shelf they passed. She moved with the wonder only a 7-year-old could have, her small fingers brushing across the plastic windows of dolls, trucks, and stuffed animals, like she was touching magic. And then she stopped. "Daddy," she whispered, as if louder words would break the moment. "It's here." He stepped closer and followed her gaze to a boxed dollhouse, 3 stories tall, with twinkling lights in the windows, a spiral staircase, and tiny furniture you could move from room to room. Pink and white with gold trim, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in one of those glossy catalogs he threw straight into the recycling bin. Sophie knelt down, her eyes wide. "This is the one Maya told me about. It even has a working elevator." Jack crouched beside her. The price tag sat on the shelf like a slap in the face. $74.99. He tried to swallow the knot rising in his throat. That was half a tank of gas and groceries for the weekend. Maybe more. "It's really nice," he said, keeping his voice steady. Sophie looked up at him, hopeful but not pleading. She'd learned not to ask for things the way other kids did. She knew how things were. Still, her hands stayed on the box, fingers tracing the corners. He forced a smile. "Want to carry it to the register? We'll see what we can do." Her face lit up. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, trying to make it sound casual. "Let's just take a look." She lifted the box carefully, cradling it like it might shatter. Jack stood up slowly, the weight of her joy pressing down on him harder than the bills waiting at home. As they walked toward the checkout line, he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince more, her or himself. The line at the register moved slowly, a patient shuffle of carts and small talk, but Jack barely noticed. His eyes flicked from the dollhouse in Sophie's arms to the total ticking up on the screen in front of the woman ahead of them. Every beep of the scanner felt like a countdown. His hands were in his coat pockets again, fingers gripping the edges of his worn leather wallet like it might change what was inside. Sophie stood beside him, her breath fogging up the clear plastic window on the box as she leaned her cheek against it. She didn't fidget, didn't whine, just held it tight, like she was afraid someone might take it from her if she let go. Jack smiled weakly at her, and she smiled back, trusting, happy, already believing the world was as kind as it looked from her small corner of it. His heart ached. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the banking app, waited for it to load. The number blinked on the screen and punched the breath out of him. $42 and change. He still had to get gas. The fridge was almost empty. Rent was due in 10 days. He could put it on the credit card, but he'd promised himself he wouldn't touch that again, unless it was a real emergency. He looked at Sophie again. Maybe this was one. "Next," the cashier said. Jack stepped forward slowly, the weight of every decision in his chest. Sophie carefully placed the dollhouse on the belt, standing on her toes to help. Jack handed over a few small groceries behind it: milk, cereal, a frozen pizza. Essentials, things they needed, not toys, not extras. The cashier scanned the dollhouse last, and the total lit up on the screen. $81.17. Jack hesitated. He reached for his wallet, and he heard his own voice in his head, calm, quiet. "Tired. What are you doing, Jack? You can't afford this." But when he glanced at Sophie, still watching him with those wide eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say no, not yet. Jack slid his card into the reader and pressed the green button with a kind of quiet hope he didn't really believe in. The screen blinked for a moment, processing, before a sharp beep cut through the air. Declined. The cashier looked up, apologetic but detached, as if she'd seen this kind of thing too many times to flinch anymore. "Sorry, it didn't go through." Jack gave a quick, tight nod and pulled the card out. "Let me try again." He turned slightly, shielding the machine from Sophie's view like he could protect her from the truth. Swiped the card this time. Another beep. Another refusal. The screen didn't care how much he wanted this. It didn't know about the math he'd done in his head that almost made it work. Didn't know how Sophie had been staring at that dollhouse for weeks in every store ad that came in the mail. "Still declined," the cashier said gently. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. A cough. Shifting feet. The kind of pressure that builds up in a checkout line when things go wrong and no one wants to say anything out loud. Jack managed a small, tight laugh that didn't quite sound human. "Guess the bank's being weird today." Sophie looked up at him, her voice soft. "Daddy?" He didn't look at her. He couldn't. Not yet. He reached into his wallet again and pulled out a 10 and a 5. $15 in cash, that was all he had. He met the cashier's eyes and gave a short nod toward the toy. "Can we just do the groceries?" She nodded, quickly scanning the milk, the cereal, the pizza, bagging it in silence. Jack turned to Sophie and crouched down. Her small arms still wrapped around the box. "Hey, kiddo," he began, voice low and careful. "We're gonna wait on this one, okay? Maybe next week." Her face didn't crumple. She just blinked slowly, like she was trying to understand what had changed. "Okay," she said quietly, and set the dollhouse back on the counter. Jack stood, heart heavy, pride thinner than ever. He picked up the bags, and then, with Sophie's hand in his, turned to walk away. Jack had just turned, grocery bags in hand, when a voice behind him cut through the air knot, loud but steady. "Let me." He paused, confused, and turned back toward the register. The woman who'd been behind them in line stepped forward, already pulling a sleek black card from her wallet. She didn't look at Jack, didn't ask for permission. Just handed the card to the cashier with a soft nod. The cashier blinked. "Ma'am, are you?" "It's fine," the woman said, her tone calm and certain. "I've got it." Jack took a step forward, heart kicking up. "Wait, what are you doing?" She finally looked at him then. Her eyes were dark and clear, steady in a way that made it impossible to argue. "You were going to buy it. She wanted it. I can help." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Sophie was still holding his hand, quiet, watching everything like she was afraid to hope. "I can't let you," he started. "You don't have to let me," the woman said gently. "It's already done." The register beeped. Transaction approved. Jack stared at the screen, dumbfounded. The woman gave a small smile, almost apologetic, and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a receipt. Then she placed it on top of the dollhouse box, sliding it gently across the counter. "There," she said. "Now it's officially yours." Sophie turned to look at her. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman crouched to her level and smiled. "You're very welcome." Jack stood frozen, still not sure how to feel. Gratitude warred with embarrassment. Relief tangled with pride. He searched the woman's face, trying to place Hirsch didn't look like she was from around here. She was dressed too sharp, too polished. Not flashy, but everything about her said she came from a different world. Before he could say more, she turned, already walking away with nothing else to say. Just like that, she was gone. Jack looked down at the dollhouse, then over at Sophie, who was cradling the box like it was made of stars. He didn't even know the woman's name. Jack gathered the dollhouse box in his arms, its weight surprisingly light compared to the heaviness in his chest. He turned quickly, scanning the store in search of the woman, the stranger, who just paid for something he couldn't give his daughter. But she was already gone. No lingering glance, no last smile. Just a flash of auburn hair disappearing around the corner near the pharmacy aisle and the soft click of low heels against the tile floor. "Wait," he said, louder than he meant to. A few people turned. Sophie looked up at him, confused. "Where'd she go?" she asked, peering past him with wide eyes. I don't know." Jack stepped forward, trying to catch another glimpse of her, but the store was busy now, carts rolling, holiday music playing faintly overhead. aisles swallowing people whole. She could have slipped out the front doors and vanished into the parking lot for all he knew. He stood there a second longer, feeling the moment already slipping from his fingers. He hated thistowing someone, being caught off guard, letting someone see the parts of his life that felt thin and exposed. But more than that, he hated not being able to say thank you. Who does something like that? He looked down at Sophie, who was running her fingers across the picture on the box like she still couldn't believe it was real. "Do you think she was an angel?" Sophie asked suddenly, her voice soft. Jack smiled, surprised. "An angel? She just showed up and helped, and then poof, gone." He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "I don't know about that." But part of him wondered. They walked toward the sliding glass doors, cold air rushing in as they stepped outside. The sun was low in the sky now, casting long shadows across the pavement. Jack scanned the lot one last time. Nothing. Just the usual hum of engines, shopping carts rattling against pavement, and a feeling in his chest that something had shifted. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again. But somehow, it didn't feel like the end. Clara Hayes stood near the edge of the parking lot, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm, the other buried deep in the pocket of her wool coat. She didn't know why she hadn't just gotten in her car and left, why she was still standing there, angled behind a row of shopping carts, watching a man and his daughter carry a dollhouse box toward a battered sedan parked 3 rows over. The little girl was beaming, gripping the side of the box like it was treasure. The dad, Jack, she thought she'd heard the cashier say, walked beside her with the kind of careful, tired steps that came from carrying more than just groceries. Clara recognized it. She'd seen that look in the mirror, though in different forms: worn-down kindness, quiet resilience. A man, too, used to doing everything alone. They reached the car. Jack popped the trunk, gently shifted some things around, and made space. The dollhouse didn't quite fit, so he laid down the back seat, adjusting it so Sophie could sit beside her new treasure without crushing it. She climbed in happily, swinging her legs as she talked to him, her voice too distant to hear, but bright even from across the lot. Clara sipped her coffee absently. It was bitter now, but she didn't care. She hadn't planned to pay for anything today except toothpaste and paper towels. She certainly hadn't planned to notice a child staring at a toy like it held all the magic in the world. But then came the card declined, the look on the dad's face, the way he tried so hard to keep his voice light for her sake. Something in that moment reached inside her and pulled. Now she was standing in the cold, watching them drive away. The car rattled slightly as it started, a low grumble that spoke of too many miles and not enough maintenance. Jack turned onto the main road, the sedan blending into the quiet Sunday traffic, taillights glowing against the early dusk. And Clara stood there for a few seconds more, coffee in hand, heart unexpectedly heavy. She told herself it was just a kind gesture, just a moment, but something inside her wasn't so sure. Clara reached her car, keys in hand, but didn't unlock it right away. She stood by the driver's side door, fingers hovering over the button, eyes still fixed on the street where the beat-up sedan had disappeared. The wind picked up, tugging at her coat, but she barely noticed. Something about the little girl's face lingered in her mind. Sophie, Jack had called her. That wide, unfiltered smile, like the world had just handed her the moon wrapped in pink cardboard. It wasn't the kind of smile you forgot easily. It wasn't polite or practiced. It was pure. The kind you only see when something good has happened to someone who wasn't expecting it. Clara turned slightly, glancing back toward the store. People were still going in and out, carts full of wrapping paper and frozen dinners and the usual holiday clutter. She could have been one of them, just another shopper, anonymous, unnoticed. But now, she wasn't. Now she was standing here, heart tugged by the strange weight of something she couldn't quite name. She wasn't the kind of person who lingered, not in places, not in moments. She was good at clean exits, built for them. Meetings, speeches, press conference essay, what needed to be said, smile the right amount, and leave before it got personal. But this felt different. It shouldn't. It was just a toy. Just a dad trying to give his daughter a little joy. But something about the way he'd looked, like refusing help, cost him something more than money, and the way Sophie had looked at him, like he was her whole world, even if he couldn't afford everything in it, it stuck. Clara took a breath, tried to shake it off, and pressed the unlock button. The car chirped. Still, she didn't get in. Instead, she slid into the passenger seat and sat quietly, staring out the windshield, not planning, not strategizing, just feeling. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to leave just yet. The apartment was cold when they walked in, colder than usual. Jack turned on the heater by the front window, the old unit rattling like it always did before it sputtered into life. Sophie dropped her coat by the door, then carefully, reverently, set the dollhouse down in the middle of their worn-out rug like it was too precious for any shelf. Jack watched her for a moment, that familiar tug in his chest returning. He should have said no. He would have said no if that woman hadn't stepped in. It still sat uncomfortably in his mind, like a loose screw in an engine. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because it reminded him of what he couldn't give. Their apartment was 2 bedrooms, if you counted the walk-in closet they'd converted for Sophie. The wallpaper in the hallway peeled in the corners, and the kitchen light flickered when the microwave ran. Jack kept it clean, though. Polished, maintained. Just like everything else in his life that felt too fragile to let go. "Can we open it now?" Sophie asked, kneeling by the box. Jack smiled and crouched beside her, running his hand gently over her hair. "Of course we can." They spent the next hour building the dollhouse together, snapping the plastic stairs into place, arranging tiny chairs around a doll-sized table, and figuring out where the miniature refrigerator looked best. Sophie made all the decisions. Jack just handed her pieces and tightened tiny screws. It wasn't much, but it felt like a win. A rare, good thing. When she finally drifted off to sleep on the couch, one hand still resting on the roof of her new dollhouse, Jack tucked a blanket around her and sat in the quiet for a moment. He glanced at the window, where the city's faded street lamps flickered through the blinds. Something about the day clung to him. The kindness. The silence that followed it. He didn't know someone had followed them out of that store. Didn't know that somewhere, not far from their building, a woman sat in her car, thinking about them both. He didn't know that for the first time in a long time, someone had seen through the quiet edges of his life and hadn't looked away. The name Clara Hayes still held weight in certain Circleson glossy magazine pages, whispered in boardrooms, and etched into the walls of luxury flagship stores around the country. Her empire had grown fast, sleek, and unstoppable. Hayes Company, known for its minimalist elegance and impossible price tags. At its peak, her face was a fixture on business profiles, her words quoted like gospel in leadership blogs. People called her brilliant, ruthless, visionary. But none of them really knew her. 6 months ago, Clara walked out of her own office, turned off her phone, and never looked back. No grand announcement, no dramatic statement, just silence. The press speculated wildly burnout, scandal, secret buyouts. None of them guessed the truth. She left because she was tired of selling a life she no longer believed in. She'd built a kingdom of glass and steel, curated every detail, down to the way her assistants answered the phone. And yet, the higher she climbed, the emptier it all felt. The hours got longer. The praise meant less. The smile in the mirror became harder to fake. She still remembered the last board meeting. Polished table, stiff suits, a room filled with people saying words like synergy and scalability while she sat still, her heart thudding with a sudden and unmistakable certainty. This isn't mine anymore. So she cashed out, quietly. Left the corner office, the interviews, the 12-hour days behind. She moved into a loft across town, swapped tailored power suits for oversized sweaters, and started shopping at regular stores where no one knew her name. And for a while, she felt invisible. Not in a bad way. In a freeing way. Until that little girl in the checkout line smiled at her with a kind of wonder she hadn't seen in years. Until the man with tired eyes tried to buy something he couldn't afford and still tried to protect his daughter from knowing. until she felt that pull, unexpected and strong, reminding her that real life, messy, flawed, beautiful still, existed beyond glass offices and quarterly earnings. Clara Hayes wasn't a headline anymore. And for once, she didn't want to be. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that filled every corner, even with the city humming just outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara stood in the kitchen, barefoot on polished concrete floors, sipping from a handmade ceramic mug that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She didn't remember buying it. One of her assistants had picked it up from an artisan in the Berkshires, back when she still had assistants. The space was everything. It was supposed to be open, airy, sleek, a minimalist's dream. White walls, matte black fixtures, imported lighting, a leather chaise that had never once been used for lounging. Abstract art that said more about her decorator's taste than her own. But it wasn't home. Not really. She padded into the living room and sat by the window, staring out over the city. Below, people moved through the streets like tiny figures in a glass snow, globe-rushing, pausing, living. She used to be one of them, always moving, always building. Now, she watched from 32 stories up, untethered from the very world she used to command. Wealth had bought her freedom. It had bought privacy, peace, and every convenience imaginable. But it couldn't buy noise, the kind of noise she missed. Not traffic or sirens. Not elevator dings or meeting room chatter. She missed life noise. The clatter of shoes kicked off at the door, the rustle of someone flipping through a book on the couch beside her. A laugh down the hall that wasn't her own. She thought about the man in the store, Jack, and his daughter, Sophie. She'd watched them walk to their car like they did it every day. Together, steady, a little worn but always moving forward. There had been noise in their world, even if it was chaotic, even if it was hard. In her world, everything worked. Everything was clean and untouched. But nothing echoed. Clara set her mug down and leaned back against the cushions. The silence pressed in around her like fog, soft and unrelenting. She had everything. And still, something essential was missing. Clara stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the untouched plate of eggs she had made out of habit more than hunger. The yolks had gone cold, a pale yellow smear against porcelain. She wasn't even sure she'd been hungry in the first place. Lately, everything felt like that routine without reason. Wake up, make coffee. Scroll through the news, try to care, try to feel something. The freedom she'd once craved had become a vacuum, wide and quiet. A life stripped of the noise she used to call stress, but now realized might have been her only anchor to something real. She turned and leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes falling on a single pair of small shoes sitting by the front door. Not hers, of course. They belonged to her goddaughter, Nora, from the last time her sister visited months ago. She hadn't returned them. Couldn't. Every time she looked at them, it tugged at something deep. And now she couldn't stop thinking about Sophie. That gap-toothed smile. The way she clutched the dollhouse box like it was fragile and sacred. The way she looked at her dad like he was the sun, even when he couldn't give her the world. Sophie reminded her of herself, back before everything became numbers and deadlines. Back when she still believed people were good just because they were. Before she learned to measure value in margins and power. Clara used to be like that, open, unguarded, loud in the way kids are, when they still think the world is listening. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been loud for joy, not performance, not presentation. She walked slowly to the window again, arms wrapped tight around her middle, as if holding herself together. Outside, the day was moving, on cars shifting, buses hissing, people crossing streets. Life kept happening, with or without her. The dollhouse had been small, a simple gesture. But the way Sophie looked at it, held it, it meant something. It filled something in the girl, and left something aching in Clara. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but she knew she was tired of empty. Clara hadn't planned to go back. She told herself she was just out for fresh air, craving something ordinary, something not delivered to her door, not curated by a concierge or wrapped in pristine packaging. Just regular errands. Like regular people. The store was exactly the same as she remembered. Humming fluorescent lights, that faint mix of overripe fruit and cleaning product, a Christmas playlist looping softly overhead. She moved through the aisles slowly, her cart half empty, fingers grazing labels she didn't need to read. When she turned into the produce section, she stopped short. There he was, Jack Carter. Same worn brown jacket, same messy hair, half-shadowed stubble on his jaw. He stood near the apples, examining one in his palm, like it had the answer to a question he couldn't quite ask. Clara froze. Her hand hovered above a bin of avocados, heart ticking faster than she liked. She considered turning around, ducking into the dairy aisle, pretending she hadn't seen him. But something in her stayed rooted. He looked up, caught her staring. Their eyes met. His brow furrowed, just slight recognition flickering behind his gaze but not certainty. She gave a polite, restrained smile. He returned it, cautious but not unkind. She reached for an avocado, mostly to give her hands something to do. "Funny running into someone you don't actually know," she said lightly. Jack let out a soft chuckle. "You again?" "You remembered. Hard to forget someone who pays for your kid's Christmas present." Clara shrugged, still not quite meeting his eyes. "It felt like the right thing to do." He nodded, slipping an apple into his cart. "Well, thanks. Again." There was a pause, not awkward, but uncertain. Like neither of them knew what this was. "I'm Clara," she offered. "Jack?" He nodded once. "And my daughter's Sophie, in case you were wondering." "I was." They stood in silence for a beat, surrounded by fruit and soft music and the faint rustle of a passing cart. Clara wasn't sure why she'd come. But now, standing there with Jack, two strangers stitched together by a moment, they both lingered, just a little longer than necessary. Jack hadn't expected to see her again. He was halfway through his list milk. Apples, something for dinner that didn't come from a box, when he looked up and there she was, standing across from him in the produce section. Same woman from the toy store. The one who'd stepped in when everything had gone sideways. He knew it the second he saw her. Her hair was pulled back today, loosely, like she hadn't planned to be seen. No makeup, no earrings, just a plain sweater and jeans, and yet something about her still felt polished. Like she didn't belong in a place where the broccoli was half wilted and the cartwheels squeaked. She looked up from the avocados and met his eyes, that flicker of surprise passing between them like static. "You?" he said before he could stop himself. She smiled, almost apologetic. "I guess we're shopping on the same schedule." Jack gave a quiet laugh. "Didn't expect to see you again. Thought maybe you were a figment of my daughter's imagination." Clara tilted her head. "A figment that pays with a credit card? Touché." They stood there for a moment, the hum of the overhead lights and distant beeping of the registers filling the space between them. Jack shifted his weight. "I didn't get the chance to say thank you properly." "You don't have to," Clara said quickly, waving a hand. "Really?" It was nothing. It wasn't nothing to her. His voice was softer now. "It wasn't nothing to me." Clara looked down at the avocado she was holding, rolling it slightly between her palms. "I just saw a little girl who wanted something her dad couldn't give her. That's all." Jack gave a faint smile, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. Still, most people would have just stood there and watched. She didn't respond to that, not directly. Instead, she looked up and said, "How's she liking the dollhouse?" Jack's smile broke through then, honest and tired, and full of something warmer than gratitude. "It hasn't left her side." Clara nodded, her voice quiet. "Good." And then, for reasons neither of them could explain, neither one walked away. They ended up in the store cafeteria, exactly by design, but not by accident either. Jack had said something about grabbing a coffee before heading home, and Clara, before she could think better of it, had said, "Me too." Now they sat across from each other at a small round table, each with a paper cup in hand. The plastic chairs wobbled slightly, and the hum of the espresso machine made it hard to pretend this was anything more than what it was strangers having coffee in a grocery store. Still, it felt easy. Clara stirred a packet of sugar into her drink, though she didn't really need it. "I haven't done this in a while. Coffee?" Jack asked, sipping his black. She shook her head with a small smile. "Coffee with someone I don't know, in a place like this." He raised a brow. "You say that like this is enemy territory." "Not enemy," she said, glancing around at the chipped tables and smudged glass. "Just unfamiliar." Jack nodded, watching her. He didn't push, but she could feel his curiosity. It hung there in the space between them, who she was, why she'd paid, why she was here now. He didn't ask. Instead he said, "Sophie thinks you're magic." Clara laughed softly, surprised by how warm the sound felt in her chest. "She's sweet and sharp. She gets that from her mom," he said before he could catch it. Then his face shifted, just slightly, and he looked down into his coffee. "Got that from her mom, I mean." Clara's smile faded with the moment, and her voice softened. "I'm sorry." Jack shrugged, not dismissively, but like someone who'd grown used to carrying weight without complaint. "It's been 3 years. You learn to keep moving." They sat in silence for a beat, and then Clara asked, "Is that what you're doing now?" He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "Trying to. Some days are easier than others." She nodded, curling her fingers around the warmth of her cup. For the first time in a long while, the small talk didn't feel like a performance. It felt like something real. Jack leaned back in his chair, his hand wrapped around the last of his coffee, unaware that across the table sat a woman whose last name once moved markets. Clara watched him speak calm, honest, a little weathered in that way people get when life hasn't let them coast. He wasn't guarded like the people she used to know. He didn't lead with charm or strategy. There were no angles. He had no idea who she was, and she wasn't ready to tell him. To Jack, she was just a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice, the kind who kept to herself but didn't seem unfriendly. Someone with time to linger in, produce aisles. Someone with a little money, maybe, but nothing that set off alarms. He didn't know that she used to command boardrooms. That men twice her age had once stood when she entered a room. That her name was still stamped on perfume bottles, embossed on handbags, scrawled in elegant script across retail windows. He didn't know she'd spent her 30s chasing profit margins and press coverage until the shine wore off and nothing was left but numbers and noise. And she liked that he didn't know, because when Jack looked at her, he didn't see a brand. He didn't see a price tag. He just saw her. "I never caught your last name," he said, casually, halfway through a story about Sophie's attempts to build a pool for her dolls using a cereal bowl and blue food coloring. Clara smiled. "Careful. It's Hayes." "Clara Hayes," he repeated, like it was just a name, and in this context, it was. No recognition, no raised eyebrows, no sudden shift in how he spoke. She nodded. "And you're Jack. No last name required, apparently." He grinned. "Carter. Jack Carter. Single dad. World's okayest mechanic." She laughed, and it felt like something settled inside her. He didn't know who she'd been. And for now, for maybe the first time in years, Clara was okay with that. Clara hadn't expected to see them again, not so soon at least. She was reaching for a jar of pasta sauce, debating between garlic basil and something with a label that promised slow-simmered perfection, when she heard the familiar sound of small sneakers slapping against tile. "Clara!" She turned, and there was Sophie racing down the aisle with her hair bouncing and a folded piece of construction paper clutched in one hand like it was made of gold. Clara blinked, caught off guard, but she smiled, crouching slightly as Sophie barreled into her with the pure, fearless affection of a child who hadn't yet learned to hold back. "I knew it was you," Sophie said breathlessly. "Dad said we might see you again, and I said we definitely would." Clara laughed. "Well, it looks like you were right." Jack appeared seconds later, turning into the aisle with a grocery basket, and that familiar, apologetic look parents get when their kid moves faster than they can. "Sophie?" "Slow down," he said, then noticed Clara. "Hey, sorry, she's, excited." "No need to apologize," Clara said, still smiling. "She made my day." Sophie beamed, then thrust the folded paper at Clara. "This is for you. It's my school's winter fun fair this Friday. There's gonna be hot chocolate, and face painting, and maybe a pony, but they're not sure about the pony." Clara took the paper gently, unfolding it with care. Bright crayons, stars and snowflakes, scrawled kid handwriting that read, "Bring your grown-ups. Everyone is welcome. It's a fundraiser," Jack added. "Parents volunteer, kids run wild, you know how it goes." Clara looked at Sophie, who was watching her with hopeful, shining eyes. "You want me to come?" Clara asked softly. "Yes," Sophie said immediately. "You have to. I want to show you my art wall. And maybe you can help at the cookie table." Clara glanced at Jack. He gave a small shrug, half grin. "We'd love to have you, if you're free." She hesitated, something in her chest catching. "I'll be there," she said, tucking the flyer into her bag like it mattered, and somehow it did. The invitation had been casual, almost a throwaway comment as they were leaving the school gym after the fundraiser, their hands still sticky from hot chocolate and powdered sugar. Jack had said, "If you're not busy, we're doing spaghetti tonight. Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join." Clara surprised herself by saying yes. Now she sat at their small kitchen table, knees brushing the underside of a surface worn smooth by years of meals and messes, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce filling the warm, cluttered apartment. Sophie sat across from her, twirling noodles like a pro, telling a wildly embellished story about how her class hamster escaped and ended up in the principal's purse. Clara listened, amused, adding in little gasps and questions that kept Sophie's momentum going. Jack moved around the kitchen in socks and a faded band tee, checking the oven, draining pasta, grabbing more napkins than anyone actually needed. It was the most informal dinner she'd had in years. No place cards, no servers, no menus printed on cardstock, just food and warmth and a tiny plastic ballerina sitting on the windowsill, left behind from Sophie's earlier performance. "This sauce is amazing," Clara said, genuinely surprised as she took another bite. Jack shrugged modestly. "It's the only thing I cook that doesn't come out of a box. Sophie insists on real food when we have guests." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Guests deserve sauce. It's a rule." Clara laughed freely without filtering herself. It bubbled up before she could stop it, the kind of laugh that curled at the edges and stuck around afterward. It felt good. She couldn't remember the last time something felt that easy. Jack looked at her from the other side of the table, his eyes soft, a little curious, like maybe he saw something in her she didn't even know she was showing. And Clara, for once, didn't rush to fill the silence. She just sat there at a table for three, in a too-small kitchen, in a life that wasn't hers and felt something real. Not perfect. Not polished, just real. After Clara left that night, with a thank you and a soft smile that lingered long after the door closed, Jack stood in the kitchen surrounded by empty plates and echoes. Sophie had gone to bed without protest, still buzzing from the evening, her drawings from the fun fair scattered on the coffee table. Jack rinsed dishes in silence, the warm water numbing his hands but not his thoughts. He liked her. That was the problem. It wasn't just that Clara was kind, or that she'd somehow slid into their lives without pushing. It was that she made everything feel easier, and Jack had learned, the hard way, that easy never stayed. People who came in like sunshine always had shadows behind them. He knew what it was to be left picking up pieces he never dropped. His ex had once promised forever, too. Smiled through tired dinners and made plans they never kept. Then came the missed calls, the distance, the fights whispered behind closed doors so Sophie wouldn't hear. And then she left. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. Said she didn't want this life anymore, didn't want them anymore. So Jack built walls, quiet ones. Not out of anger, but survival. Now Clara was here, appearing in grocery stores, eating spaghetti at their table, laughing like she belonged. And Jack was terrified of what it meant if she did. He didn't know where she came from, really, what her life looked like when she wasn't smiling across a sticky cafe table or crouching beside Sophie's drawings. She was private, polished even in jeans and boots. There were edges to her story she hadn't offered, and Jack wasn't sure he wanted to know them. Because letting her in meant more than sharing dinner. It meant exposing the fragile parts of his life he kept held together with duct tape and determination. It meant risking disappointment again. And Jack had nothing left to lose that wasn't wrapped up in his daughter's laughter. He wiped down the counter with slow, methodical movements, listening to the heater rattle and the soft creak of Sophie's bed above. Letting Clara in might change everything, but not letting her in? That could too. The bulb above the kitchen table had been flickering for days. Jack kept meaning to fix it, but between work, Sophie's school projects, and a to-do list that never stopped growing, it always fell to the bottom of the pile. Clara noticed it the moment she walked in with a borrowed book for Sophie and a half-dozen bakery cookies she claimed were extras. She tilted her head toward the ceiling as Jack set the plow kettle on the stove. "You know that thing's gonna drive you mad eventually, right?" she asked, watching the light blink like it couldn't make up its mind. Jack chuckled. "Welcome to my world. I've got a ladder in the hall closet. Just haven't gotten around to it." "I'll get it," Clara said, already moving. "Clara!" "It's fine." But she was gone, rummaging around like she'd been in the place 100 times. When she came back, she had not one, but two ladder sheaths, small aluminum one, and Sophie's step stool, painted purple and covered in stickers. They both laughed. "Guess we're prepared for all height scenarios now," she said, setting them side by side. Jack climbed up while Clara steadied the base. The bulb came out with a twist, and he passed it down. "New one's in the drawer," he said. Clara fetched it and held it up to him. "Teamwork," she offered. As he twisted the new bulb in, light flooded the room in a soft glow. He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Another crisis averted," he said. They stood there a moment, quiet in the fresh light, just close enough to feel it. Clara looked at the step stool, then at him. "You know, when I was a kid, I used to climb on counters. My mom hated it, said I was too stubborn to ask for help." "Were you?" Jack asked. She hesitated. "I still am." Something flickered in her expression, then unspoken history, a hint of where. "I'm not used to people letting me in," she added, softer now. "Or wanting to." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just looked at her in the kind of way that said, "Maybe I do." And Clara, for once, didn't pull away. The engine made a sound it definitely shouldn't. Have low, irregular, like something inside was trying to clear its throat and couldn't. Clara had pulled into the garage behind Jack's apartment complex, eyebrows knit in frustration, hands tight on the wheel. She hadn't meant to bring the car here. It just happened. One bad turn and a flashing check engine light. And suddenly, she was parked in Jack's gravel lot, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering if this was a terrible idea. Jack opened the door a few minutes later, wiping his hands with a dish towel. Sophie's laughter floated down from upstairs, something about paper dolls and glitter glue. He noticed the car right away, low, sleek, and out of place among the dented pickups and sun-faded sedans that normally filled the lot. "Trouble?" he asked, approaching casually. Clara got out, crossing her arms as the cold air brushed her cheeks. "It's been making a noise for days. I thought I could ignore it." He gave a small smile. "That never works. Want me to take a look?" She hesitated. "You sure?" Jack walked around the hood, already rolling up his sleeves. "It's what I do." She popped the hood, and he leaned over the engine, fingers moving with practiced ease. Clara watched him, how calm he was, how focused. There was something grounding about the way he worked. No show, no ego. Just skill and quiet confidence. He adjusted a few things, checked a belt, reached for a wrench from a toolbox he kept by the back door. "This is not your average ride," he said, finally, eyes narrowing as he examined the inner workings. Clara gave a half smile. "No, I guess it's not. It's a Falcon VX. Limited edition," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "They don't even make these for just anyone." She said nothing, just leaned against the car, watching him. Jack didn't ask questions, not yet. He just kept working until the engine purred again, smooth and effortless. "There," he said, closing the hood. "Should be fine now." Clara looked at him, really looked. "Thank you." He shrugged. "Just another car." But it wasn't. And so wasn't she. It started with small things: a second coffee cup on the stoop, a neatly folded scarf left on the coat rack, an unfamiliar pair of boots by the door. Clara didn't move in. She didn't have to. She just appeared, more and more often, like sunlight slipping through blinds no one had meant to open. She came by with books for Sophie or helped carry groceries when Jack's arms were full. Some nights she stayed for dinner, other times she just dropped something off and lingered for a moment longer than necessary. Her laugh began to echo faintly through the wall, slow and unexpected. Sophie would call out, "Clara's here," like it was the most normal thing in the world. But in their building, where doors stayed shut and lives were mostly kept quiet, people noticed. Mrs. Harold from 3B started asking Jack about his lady friend while folding laundry in the basement. Mr. Feldman, who always read the paper by the mailboxes, raised his eyebrows when Clara passed with Sophie's backpack slung over one shoulder. "She's here a lot," someone murmured in the hallway. "Doesn't look like she belongs around here," another said, watching her step carefully through the gravel lot in leather boots that had clearly never seen a dirt road. Jack heard it. Of course he did. He'd lived here long enough to understand the rhythm of low voices and sideways glances. He was used to being invisible, the quiet guy who fixed cars and raised his kid and didn't cause trouble. But Clara's presence drew light. And light, inevitably, drew attention. He caught one of the whispers as he was unlocking his door. "Wonder what she sees in him." He didn't react, but it stuck. Inside, Sophie was laughing as Clara helped her build a cardboard castle for her dolls. Jack paused in the doorway, just watching for a moment. Clara looked up and caught his eye, smiling with that easy warmth that never felt rehearsed. What she saw in him, he still wasn't sure. But she kept showing up anyway, and that was starting to mean more than he could admit. The night was quiet, the kind of soft stillness that came only after Sophie had fallen asleep and the world outside had settled into its winter hush. Jack stood at the kitchen sink, hands resting on the edge, staring through the fogged window at the darkened street below. Inside, the light above the table glowed gently, warm and steady, no longer flickering. Behind him, Clara was curled up on the couch, with a blanket draped over her knees. Flipping through one of Sophie's illustrated storybooks, she claimed she'd borrowed for research. She read slowly, aloud sometimes, with that half-smile on her lips, like she was trying not to be completely pulled in and failing. It was the kind of moment Jack would have once avoided. Too peaceful, too full, too good. But tonight, he didn't look away. Instead, he leaned back against the counter and just took it in. Her presence no longer felt out of place here. She fit, somehow, not because she tried to, but because she didn't. Clara had never asked to change anything about their life. She just came alongside it, quietly folding herself into the corners they hadn't even realized were empty. For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel like he had to earn every second of joy. He wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the apology, for the goodbye wrapped in good intentions. He wasn't holding his breath. He caught himself watching her more often now, not with suspicion or caution, but with something softer, something like hope. Clara looked up from the book then, catching him mid-thought. "What?" she asked, half amused. Jack shook his head slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing. Just thinking." "Dangerous," she teased. He chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, maybe." But even as he said it, something shifted in his chest. A crack in the wall he'd built, small, but real. Because in that moment, In the quiet of his too-small apartment, with the sound of Clara's voice in the air and Sophie's drawings taped to the fridge behind him, Jack Carter finally started to believe that maybe he didn't have to do life alone anymore. Maybe he could have happiness. And this time, not lose it. It happened at the school drop-off line on a Wednesday morning, the kind of rushed, half-awake routine Jack had memorized by now. Coffee in a travel mug, Sophie in a ponytail she always redid herself after he tried, and Clara in the passenger seat, sipping something herbal and laughing softly at Sophie's endless chatter about an upcoming class play. They pulled into the lot like always, Clara helping Sophie unbuckle while Jack leaned over to remind her not to lose her gloves again. Nothing out of the ordinary until he saw the woman. Lisa Kent, mother of Sophie's classmate Riley, stood a few feet from the entrance, talking to another parent. She wore sunglasses too big for her face, and a coat that probably cost more than Jack's rent, but she was always friendly, always polite. And this time, her eyes locked on Clara. Not a passing glance. Not a casual double-take. Recognition. Sharp and immediate. Jack caught it, watched Lisa's expression flicker from surprise to calculation to something more guarded. She leaned closer to the woman beside her, whispered something, and both of them turned their heads just slightly toward Clara. Clara, unaware or simply unbothered, waved goodbye to Sophie and slid back into the car. Jack got in too, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary. He didn't say anything right away, but the question had already started forming. Not an accusation, just an itch beneath the surface. Back home, Clara helped unload groceries, chatting as she unpacked produce and placed things neatly in his cluttered fridge like she belonged there. Jack watched her. The way she moved, the calm she carried. He cleared his throat. "Hey, this is probably a weird question. Booth, has someone ever told you that you look really familiar?" Clara froze for just half a second. Not enough for most people to notice. But Jack did. She looked up, her smile quick but not careless. "I used to be in retail," she said casually. "Maybe you saw me in some old ads or something." Jack nodded, pretending to accept that. But a part of him, the one that had learned to read people like engine show they sounded when something was off, wasn't convinced. Something didn't add up. The laptop sat open on the kitchen table, screen casting a cold glow across the room. Jack stared at it, arms crossed, heart heavier than he wanted to admit. He hadn't meant to look her up. Really, he hadn't. But something about the way Lisa Kent had reacted stuck with him all day, replaying like a bad song he couldn't shut off. And then, late at night, when Sophie was asleep and Clara had gone home, curiositino, doubt had gotten the better of him. He typed Clara Hayes into the search bar. And there she was. Dozens of results, press releases, interviews, photos of her in black tie gowns and crisp suits, shaking hands with politicians, accepting awards, speaking at conferences. Her name, attached to luxury brands, national campaigns, seven-figure deals. Founder and former CEO of Hayes Comp, a fashion empire, a household name. He stared at a picture of her standing in front of a showroom in New York, smiling like she owned the world. Because she had, at one point. The next day, Clara stopped by in the early evening, like always. She brought cinnamon rolls Sophie had begged for at the bakery and a book about space travel for bedtime. She moved through the apartment like it was home. Jack didn't say anything until Sophie went to her room. Then, he closed the laptop slowly and looked up. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara froze, her smile fading. "Tell you what?" He turned the screen toward her. A photograph of her accepting some national business award stared back. "That you're this Clara Hayes." She didn't speak at first, just stared at the image, as if it were someone else entirely. "I wanted to," she said finally. "But I didn't know how. And by the time I did, I didn't want it to change how you looked at me." Jack's jaw tightened. "So what was this? An experiment? Slumming it with the single dad?" "No," Clara said quickly, stepping forward. It was real, every part of it. You, Sophie, this place, these nights, I needed something honest. I chose this. Jack stood there, torn between anger and disbelief. Yeah? Well, you should have chosen to tell me the truth. Clara didn't argue. She just looked at Jaime's soft, voice barely above a whisper. I was afraid if you knew who I was, you'd walk away first. But now, it looked like he just might. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed tight across her chest, as if holding herself together was the only way to stay upright. The apartment felt colder than usual, like something essential had slipped out the door and left nothing but silence in its place. Jack hadn't spoken in minutes. He sat at the table, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might offer answers he didn't want to hear. I didn't lie, Clara said finally, her voice low but steady. Not exactly. I just didn't tell you everything. Jack looked up, his expression unreadable. I didn't come into your life with some agenda, she continued. I wasn't trying to fool you or play some part. I left that world because it stopped making sense to me. The money, the press, the meeting sit looked good on paper, but it felt like I was disappearing inside it. She stepped closer, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it even. I built a life around appearances, around being the woman everyone expected. And I woke up one day and realized I didn't recognize myself. So I walked away. Not because I lost something, but because I needed to find anything real. Jack exhaled, the sound sharp. And you didn't think I deserved to know that? Clara met his gaze. I was afraid that if I told you who I really was, you'd put me back in a box, see me as some rich woman playing house. And this, she gestured around the room, to the kitchen table with its mismatched chairs, to Sophie's art taped to the wall, to the blanket they all shared on movie nights. This is the first thing in years that's felt real. You felt real. She paused, voice cracking. I didn't want to ruin it. Jack didn't respond right away. His jaw was tight, but his eyes weren't angry, they were hurt. That was worse. Clara swallowed. I wasn't trying to be someone I'm not. I just wanted to remember who I used to be, before everything I touched turned into a transaction. Silence filled the space again. And for the first time, Clara truly didn't know if staying meant anything anymore, because maybe the truth had come too late. The next morning, the apartment was quiet, in a way that felt off, like the kind of silence that lingered after something had been broken. Jack moved through the motion-sporing cereal, packing Sophie's lunch, tying her shoes with careful fingers. He didn't say much, just offered small smiles and a tired, when Sophie told him about her class's plan to build a snow volcano out of baking soda. But she noticed. Kids always notice. After breakfast, Sophie sat on the couch, hugging her knees, her eyes flicking to the front door every few minutes. Then, as Jack pulled her coat from the hook and handed it to her, she finally asked it. The question that had been sitting behind her eyes since she'd woken up. Is Clara mad at us? Jack paused, one hand still holding the coat, heart snagging on her words. He crouched down, meeting her eyes. No, sweetie, she's not mad. Sophie's brow furrowed. Then why didn't she come over? She was supposed to help me finish the castle roof. He sighed, trying to find the right word sounds that wouldn't feel like lies, but wouldn't weigh too heavy on her either. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. Sophie looked down at the sleeves of her sweater. Did you make her sad? Jack blinked. That one hit harder than he expected. No, he said softly. It's just complicated. Clara has a big life, a different kind of life than ours. Sophie looked up, her voice quiet. But she liked our life. She liked spaghetti night. She said so. Jack nodded, his throat tightening. Yeah, she did. There was a long pause. Then Sophie whispered, You look sad again, Daddy, like before. Jack pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. I'm okay, kiddo. Just figuring things out too. She didn't say anything after that. Just let him hold her. And Jack sat there, wondering how you explain to a child that sometimes People don't leave out of anger but because they're afraid to be loved for the first time in a long, long time. And sometimes, maybe you are too. The apartment was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet Jack didn't try to fill. The TV was off, the lights dimmed. Sophie had barely touched her dinner, poking at her macaroni before pushing the plate away. Later, while he washed the dishes, Jack noticed her at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out slightly, focused in that way only children can be. She was writing, carefully, slowly, using her best penmanship. He didn't ask what it was for. He figured it was for school. Maybe another drawing for the art wall in her classroom. But when she folded the paper into a neat square and slipped it into her jacket pocket, Jack got that familiar tug in his chest, the one that came right before Sophie did something bigger than her age let on. "Going somewhere?" he asked gently. She shrugged. "Just outside. I won't go far." Jack watched her for a second, then nodded. "Okay, 10 minutes. She slipped on her boots and coat, pulled her hat low and left. Sophie knew exactly where Clara parked. She had watched enough times from the window to memorize the silver curve of the car, the way it always sat 2 spots down from their own. Even now, parked and still, it looked different from the other cars, quiet and expensive, like it was holding a secret. Sophie approached it carefully, her breath puffing little clouds into the cold night air. She pulled the note from her pocket and smoothed it with both hands. Then, with the seriousness of someone much older, she tucked it gently under the driver's side wiper. It was written in big, slightly crooked letters. "Dear Clara, I don't know why you're sad, but I hope you come back soon. We miss you. I saved your seat. Love, Sophie." She stepped back and looked at it for a long moment, her small hands balled into fists inside her mittens. Then she turned and walked back toward the apartment, her boots crunching softly in the snow, never once looking back. Inside the car, tucked beneath the note, the silence waited. But it wouldn't last. Not after this. Clara hadn't planned on returning to Jack's building. Not that night. Not ever, if she was being honest. She'd told herself walking away was the right thing, that she had protected something fragile by stepping aside. That it was better for him, better for Sophie. But the ache hadn't left, so she drove past the complex slowly, headlights off, engine low, just to see, to remind herself why she had stayed away. To look, once more, at the window with the paper snowflakes taped in uneven rows and the porch light Jack always forgot to change. That's when she saw it, a small white square, tucked beneath her windshield wiper. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, barely holding on. At first, she thought it was a flyer or a note about parking. But when she stepped out and peeled it carefully from the glass, her breath caught. "Dear Clara, I don't know why you're sad, but I hope you come back soon. We miss you. I saved your seat. Love, Sophie." Clara stood there in the cold, her hand trembling around the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sophie's careful block letters pressed hard with a purple pen, like she wanted the words to last forever. She read it once, then twice, then a third time, because her heart couldn't quite accept it the first 2. It was such a simple thing, really. No questions, no blame. Just hope and the kind of open-hearted forgiveness only a child could offer without hesitation. Clara felt the tears rising before she could stop them, and she didn't wipe them away this time. She let them fall, quietly, onto the edge of Sophie's words. She had left because she thought they'd be better off without the weight of who she was. Because she didn't think she deserved the softness Jack gave her or the trust Sophie placed in her so freely. But this note didn't see status or scandal or secrets. It only saw the truth. She had been missed. She sat in the driver's seat, the note still in her hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry. Not to the night, not to the car, to them." And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like driving away. The toy store looked the same flickering fluorescent lights, same smell of cardboard, plastic, and faint vanilla from the snack stand near the entrance. Clara stepped through the automatic doors, unsure why she had come back. Maybe it was to retrace her steps. Maybe to remind herself that everything started here not with a grand gesture, but a moment small enough to go unnoticed by anyone else. She moved through the aisles slowly, her heels muffled against the scuffed linoleum, passing rows of action figures and stuffed animals until she reached the aisle she remembered. It hadn't changed. The shelves were stocked for the holidays, crowded with boxes in bold colors and big promises. And there, on the third shelf from the bottom, sat the same dollhouse. Pink and white with golden window frames, its miniature world tucked neatly inside. The exact model Sophie had cradled like treasure. The same one Clara had stepped up to buy without thinking twice. She stood in front of it, hands buried in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the tiny spiral staircase and painted-on curtains. Funny, she thought, how something so small had unraveled her entire life. She remembered Jack's face when his card was declined, the flicker of shame, the quiet heartbreak. And Sophie's, too. Hopeful, trusting, unaware of just how heavy that moment had been for her father. Clara hadn't been thinking about consequences then, or what came after. She had just wanted to help. It was instinct. A need. Maybe a longing, toothsome, deep, unspoken part of her that wanted to connect with something real. And she had. More than she ever expected. Now standing here again, it all felt like a closed circle. A quiet invitation to begin, really begin if she was brave enough to try. She reached out and ran her fingers gently along the top of the box, then stepped back. No words, no decisions yet. Just presence, the same shelf, the same dollhouse. But Clara Hayes was not the same woman anymore. Clara heard the chime above the store door just moments after she stepped away from the shelf. She didn't look at first. She didn't expect it to matter. Probably just another parent doing last-minute holiday shopping, another stranger chasing joy in a box. But then she heard his voice. "Didn't expect to find you here." She turned slowly. Jack stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, eyes steady. There was no tension in his shoulders, no sharpness in his tone, just quiet surprise and something softer, maybe even relief. Clara's breath caught. "Jack." He nodded once. "Sophie wanted me to come pick out wrapping paper for her dollhouse furniture. She's building a whole Christmas scene in it now." Clara smiled faintly, a little breathless. That sounds exactly like her. For a moment, they just stood there too, people who had orbited each other for weeks, caught in something they hadn't expected and couldn't quite name. The air between them was still, but not heavy. Not anymore. Jack stepped closer, his gaze flicking briefly to the shelf behind her. "Came back to the beginning?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I guess I needed to see it again. Remind myself that sometimes the smallest moments change everything." Jack exhaled slowly. "They do." There was a silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. This one felt like the pause before something honest. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Clara said, voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't trying to pretend. I just were scared," Jack finished. "Yeah, so was I." She blinked at him, surprised. "I pushed you away because I thought I couldn't have something good without losing it," he said. "You didn't lie, Clara. You just got here with a story I didn't know how to read." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. Jack took one more step toward her. "So maybe we stop pretending. No past, no headlines, no guessing." She nodded slowly. "Just us." He smiled. "Just us." And in the middle of a toy store aisle, surrounded by blinking lights and shelves of pretend lives, two very real people finally let go of everything they weren't. Tan took a step toward everything they could be. They sat in Jack's car in the parking lot, the engine off, the windows starting to fog with their breath. The store lights glowed dim behind them, casting long reflections across the dash. Neither of them seemed in a rush to leave. For the first time in weeks, they weren't dodging truths or hiding behind small talk. No distractions, no Sophie between them to soften the edges. Just two people, face to face, nowhere to hide. "I've been thinking about that night," Clara said quietly, fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. The checkout line. Sophie, the dollhouse. Jack looked over at her, waiting. I used to think the world could be fixed if you threw enough money at it, she continued. If you packaged things neatly enough, branded them just right, people would be happy, and I was good at it. I made a life out of knowing what people wanted, at least, what they thought they wanted. Jack listened, unmoving. But that night, it wasn't about the toy, Clara said, her voice soft but certain. It was about what you were trying to give her, hope, even when you didn't have much of anything else. You were willing to hand her your last dollar just so she could feel like the world said yes for once. Jack exhaled slowly. She's all I've got. If I can make her smile, even on the worst days, then I've done something right. Clara nodded. And I saw that. I saw you. And I think I envied you more than I've ever envied anyone in my life. He blinked. Me? You live without hiding, she said. You struggle, sure, but you love openly, honestly. I forgot what that even looked like. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jack said, I thought the dollhouse made her happy, but it was you. You made her feel seen. Clara's voice cracked. And you made me feel real. He reached for her hand hesitantly, gently, and she let him. Their fingers laced like they were meant to meet in the middle of all this mess. It had never been about the toy. It had always been about the people who showed up when it mattered most. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a golden haze across the countertop, where 3 mismatched mugs satone with coffee, one with cocoa, and one half full of milk and glittery cereal. The apartment was still the same, too small, a little drafty, and full of noise that came from life being fully lived. But something in the air had changed. Clara stood barefoot on the worn tile floor, her sweater sleeves pushed up, helping Sophie cut out paper snowflakes for the front window. Jack leaned against the doorframe, watching them with that quiet look he wore when he didn't want to interrupt something beautiful. It had been 2 weeks since the night in the parking lot. 2 weeks since Clara had stepped fully, honestly, into their lives, not as the woman who once owned a fashion empire, not as a stranger with a credit card, but as herself, unpolished, unscripted. Here. She hadn't moved in. Not officially. But there were extra shoes by the door now. Her scarf hung beside Jack's jacket. And Sophie had already cleared space in her closet for Clara's fancy clothes, which, according to her, included exactly 1 cashmere sweater and a pair of boots that were too pretty to leave behind. There were still questions, still fears. But they talked, now really talked, about what they wanted. What they didn't, what scared them, what felt worth fighting for. And every conversation circled back to the same truth. This was something none of them had expected, and none of them wanted to let go. Clara looked up from the table, a strand of hair falling loose as she smiled at Jack. We're saving a spot on the window for yours, she said, holding up a crooked paper star. Jack grinned. Then I guess I better make it a good one. Sophie beamed. We're going to fill the whole window, 1 snowflake for every happy day. Clara reached for Jack's hand without even thinking. And he didn't hesitate. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And it began, like most of the best things in life, with a simple, quiet moment of kindness that changed everything.